I hate EA. I must mention this before beginning the review. I fucking hate EA, and I wish for nothing but ill will. But Dead Space is so spectacular that I will lovingly and gently, yet firmly, stroke EA's stick for the next 10 minutes with my feet. If you love the movie Alien, you will absolutely love this game because it's clearly inspired by it and other sci-fi horror games like System Shock 2. I won't tell you the story, but it basically follows the formula that Alien set for all sci-fi horror movies and games to follow, to a fault almost. There's really nothing surprising that happens here as long as you're very familiar with the formula. Even the surprise elements, the plot twists, are predictable. In a game like Dead Space, you'd expect the story to drive the game forward. At least you'd expect it more in Dead Space than you would say in Crisis, but it doesn't, because every chapter, and the game's divided into 12 chapters, is basically get this, fix this, and kill these, and move on to the next chapter. The story surprisingly doesn't move the game forward, and merely remains there as backdrop most of the time. There were several times in which something happens and help develop the story, and some of these moments are quite interesting to follow, but they few and far between for a game of this sort, and I ended up feeling that the story may as well not exist at all. For a story that revolves around finding out what happened to a particular place, there really isn't much to discover. Though I may have sounded like I'm criticizing the game, I am really not, because the game, despite the story not steering the game all that much, never feels tiring to play or repetitious. And I'll try my best to explain why exactly that is. First, the gunplay is absolutely magnificent. It's strange how some games, though they follow similar patterns and formulas as others, feel different and far superior. I noticed this with Mass Effect that uses a similar cover system that games like Gears of War and Vegas made popular, but for some reason or another, and I won't get into it here, was simply tons more fun to use. And I noticed this also with Dead Space. It's relatively slow-paced and straightforward gunplay. You move slowly forward, monsters appear in front of you and rush at you. You shoot them enough times and they die. Quite simple and at face value quite boring. A lot of games try to pad this formula by throwing in tons of enemies all at once, so that things feel a bit more hectic, but they mostly end up feeling somewhat cheap. But Dead Space tries something different. It introduces dismemberment. Now, I really don't think dismemberment by itself is all that unique. It's essentially no different from going for headshots. Instead of aiming for the head, you aim for the limbs. But Dead Space throws enough twists to the concept of precise aiming to make the game at least feel quite different from other games. For one thing, there are different types of monsters, so going for the limbs doesn't work the same for one monster as it does for another. Basically, the difference is whether the limbs are perpendicularly aligned to the floor or horizontally. Some monsters don't have feet, they only have arms, so trying to cut off arms with a beam that spreads across horizontally doesn't work as well as shooting with a beam that spreads across vertically. Some monsters run towards you extremely quickly, so shooting off one of its arms before it reaches you will lessen the blow when it does finally reach you, but will still subject you to some damage. It's far more effective to blow off its legs so that it won't even have a chance to reach you. And there are quite a few of these tactical elements to dismemberment. These are just two basic examples of how different types of monsters force you to adopt different tactics. Throw in several other types of monsters like those that carry around what's basically equivalent to explosives, small critters that move in swarms, those that move slowly, those that move erratically, those that are lightning quick, those that can climb walls, those that move using pipes above and beneath you, those that shoot things at you, those that explode and leave nasty little critters behind, those that leap across great distances to get a jump on you, those that can't be killed, and so forth. And you have an interesting mix of monsters to keep you on your toes, and often forces you to switch between weapons to effectively dispose of them quickly before you're overwhelmed. And that's the second thing about the game. It has very unique weapons. There are basically only 6 types of weapons, but they're extremely varied, and they were obviously designed to deal with specific types of monsters and situations. There are weapons that are effective against swarms of small critters, weapons best used only against single enemies, weapons that are for lumbering monsters, weapons for those that don't have limbs to speak of, weapons for faster, skittish monsters, weapons for killing mini-bosses, weapons for stopping enemies, weapons that are good for all situations, and so forth. To add even more variety, each weapon has a secondary fire, and these give you not only the choice to combat various types of enemies all at once without having to switch weapons, but they give you a greater means of dealing with even more specific situations. For example, one secondary fire allows you to deal with situations in which you're overwhelmed by the sheer number of monsters attacking you all at once. And to make things even more interesting, you can upgrade your weapons by using a workbench and power nodes. Each power node allows you to upgrade one of various options for each type of weapons and other items like amount of damage weapon causes, the number of ammos the weapon can hold, and the speed at which the weapon can reload. Most people will probably choose to upgrade their weapon's damage ability, so to balance things out and make the choices a bit tougher since you probably won't accumulate enough power nodes to upgrade everything, the game forces you to follow an upgrade tree. with each branch giving you various options on what you can upgrade. Do you upgrade only one or two weapons and make them as powerful, or do you upgrade all your weapons so you can keep a variety of useful weapons? Do you go for the upgrade for the number of ammos your weapons can hold, or do you go for the empty upgrade so you can get to that damage upgrade quicker? These variables that the game presents keep the game fresh and interesting throughout. And really, it's about the variables, their variety. The game is so masterfully paced that I never felt bored, or as if I were playing a cookie cutter third-person shooter. You have the ability to certain abilities like slowing objects slash monsters and a gravity gun-like ability in which you can grab objects that are far away from you and fling them. And you use them in so many varying situations like going on walls and ceilings in zero gravity, moving quickly through a space in which your air supply is limited, solving physics-based and timed puzzles, getting through otherwise deadly traps, and all this while often fighting multiple enemies. And there were these mini games strewn about throughout the game that come up just at the right moment to break up the pacing and keep things interesting. For example, there's one instance in which you have to run across a lengthy span with asteroids hitting the surface of the span. Of course, there's cover provided, and your objective is to cross the span by doing timed runs from one cover to the next while avoiding the asteroids. Now, by itself, this may not sound all that exciting, but if you've been killing one monster after another for a good bit, it's a nice change of pace. Another example is when this tentacle thing grabs a hold of your foot and drags you across the corridor, the end of which most certainly awaits your doom, and you have to shoot a certain vulnerable part of a tentacle enough times to have it drop you, all the while it's thrashing you about and keeping you from aiming steadily. It sounds incredibly gimmicky, the stuff of console games that PC elitists would scoff at, but it's a welcome change of pace in this game because not everything has to do with timed attacks. They come about rarely, and when they do, you feel refreshed in having been given the opportunity to do something different. The game is not all that original besides the weapons by its parts alone, but it throws at you the entire textbook of everything that has worked in other games and does them quite often one better. It is simply a joy playing the games, going from one situation to another, and it is this great pacing that keeps you playing and deeply involved in this game. The game also has great atmosphere. Granted, a lot of it is lighting, i.e., the lack thereof, but there's something to it in this game that sets it apart from, say, Doom 3. There were some moments in which I did feel a bit cheated because the game felt more difficult at times than it needed to be because I simply couldn't see the monsters clearly. But most of the times I felt that the game did a great job with the lighting, making it just dark enough to provide some really tense moments, and it was extremely gorgeous to boot. Plus, each weapon comes with a flashlight, so there's none of that contrivance that was annoying in Doom 3. I don't think the game is scary. It certainly has shocking moments in which enemies jump at you all of a sudden, but it's not cheap like in Doom 3. In Doom 3, you had enemies attacking you from behind quite often or appearing out of nowhere. Dead Space will rarely, if ever, have an enemy jump at you from behind. Instead, everything happens in front of you, but these monsters are freaky enough and move strangely and emit deep, frightening growls or howls that you are at extreme unease as you move forward. You can't afford to relax too often and let your guard down. When there are breaks in the game, you feel extremely relieved, and just when you're about to relax a little bit, the game throws you into tense situations to keep things moving. In fact, some of these moments are so tense that I simply had to take a break from the game and do something more lighthearted, like play TF2. Uh, there are some things that I didn't like about the game, but they were minor. The game does have a wonderful physics system, and things that should move do. However, I didn't like how the corpses on the floor stick to your feet, or how you're able to dribble them as if they were soccer balls. They feel too light and, well, like how I'd imagine stuffed life-size human dolls would feel. They're just a bit too loose and flail about as if they were weightless, which works great in zero gravity, but not when they're supposed to be several hundred pounds heavy. And the game does feel a bit too contrived, meaning the developers seem to have thought about what situations to present to players and how the players are supposed to deal with them. In other words, it feels a bit too formulaic at times, but again, these are minor complaints. One thing I must point out to those that are worried about the game and how it will play with keyboard and mouse controls, I haven't encountered any problems at all. I firmly believe that keyboard and mouse is better suited for the game. In fact, the game's a bit on the easy side with the keyboard and mouse controls, but it does balance things out with the game supplying just enough ammo and items to keep you moving forward without getting too frustrated. So the easiness of the game isn't a big detriment. Overall, Dead Space is a wonderful game that should not be missed by anyone who enjoys shooters or survival slash horror games or just games in general. Of all the games I've played thus far this year, I feel this is the best game along with Mass Effect, and EA sucks.